Maniac is directed by Frank Calhoun, written by Alexandra Aja, Gregory Levasseur, and C.A. Rosenberg, and it's based on the old 1980 film of the same name, directed by William Lustig, and this movie stars Elijah Wood, Nora Arnezeder, and America Olivo. Now, Maniac follows a guy named Frank, and by day he is an antique mannequin restoration guy, but at night he stalks women, kills them, and cuts off their scalps in order to use them for his mannequins. And this movie kind of follows him around and tries to figure out why he is the way he is. Now, like I mentioned, Maniac is a remake of this 1980s film that I believe was kind of ahead of its time. It was very, very violent, very, very controversial, and the main difference of this remake with the old version is that actually makes it kind of a bit more controversial is the fact that most of this movie is shot in first person. So it's point of view of the killer while he's killing people. And that premise, while disturbing, is very interesting to me, and I decided to watch this movie. And the ambition on display is definitely very admirable. However, the rest of the movie really just kind of falls apart by the end, doesn't really mesh together. Now, the point of view technique is definitely very fascinating. Like, it's really always interesting to watch. However, it does end up feeling like a gimmick very early on. They do some cool things with the technique. However, they weren't as inventive as they needed to be to last 90 minutes. It honestly did get kind of boring at times because they were just kind of doing the same thing. If you do research though on how the cinematographer worked with the actors and the director, it's actually very interesting because you have the cinematographer in the middle with the camera, and then you have two actors like with one hand each kind of interacting and stuff. And that technique is really cool. However, I feel like it's very limited in this movie because this movie is trying to be so much of an exploitation movie that I feel like they really didn't have that many opportunities to make use of it. There's some images in this movie that are actually very, very hauntingly beautiful in a way, like mostly with the mannequins and stuff. And this movie overall does look very good. Some of the makeup is also very, very good. Like, it reminded me of like those old school horror movies with Tom Savini, especially near the end of this movie. And the best makeup stuff in this movie comes from like the simple things, like Frank's hands have like little wounds on them, and they feel very, very sensitive because they feel very real. However, and this is gonna sound really morbid, that the big scale gore effects, like actually cutting people's scalp off, it feels too clean. And I honestly, well, I don't know what it's like to cut scalp off people, and I don't want to find out. But if it's really that clean, I guess it's that clean. However, if you're trying to put us into the shoes of a serial killer, I feel like it would have been a bit more messy. Again, I don't know what it's like to actually do that. However, I feel it kind of ruins the point. We're supposed to feel disgusted about the action. However, it's not as disgusting as you might expect. But one of my biggest problems with this movie is the fact that the scenes just feel very disjointed. It just didn't really feel like a flow throughout the movie. This movie really does try to feel like a character study and tries to investigate, his mindset. However, the editing just kind of lowers it to a level of voyeurism. We don't always feel like we are Frank. It's just like we feel like we're looking over his shoulder at, his world, which is presented as a very, one-sided way. Like, and I get that maybe he's crazy and he really only has one side to his life, but, I guess for a movie, like, I'd like a bit more. To the editor's credit, though, there are a few scenes here that are very, very tension filled. However, these scenes are very few and far in between. So, like the rest of the movie, you're just kind of thinking, like, let's get on with it. Let's go for the next, creepy stalking scene. And I did not feel like we had to see so much of the mother. And I get how important the mother is to the story, his relationship with his mother. However, like, it just really feels like it ruined the flow, like, because you have like a random scene with the mother, and it's just like, okay, like, we're just seeing the same things over and over again. And again, you can argue that this is all because he's insane and stuff like that, but as an audience, we just can't connect. They do something cool with the musical score in this movie. They really, kind of recall the 80s with this, synth pop kind of stuff, and that's cool. However, it does kind of get old again pretty early on, and I would have liked them to include like more modern stuff to make it seem scarier. The sound design overall is actually kind of great though, like with the background breathing and stuff, and just overall like the sounds they have of knife entering skin. It's very disgusting. It's very disturbing. It works well. In terms of like the plot of this movie, again, it tries to be a character study. However, it doesn't really work out that way. And the motivations we get for why Frank is like this ultimately are unclear. And I don't know. We don't really feel like we know who this guy is by the end of the movie. And maybe that was the point. It's kind of like a bad point to make though. The other characters, unfortunately, are totally skin deep. Like, they really are there for cannon fodder. And I get, they're victims of a killer, but the most you could do with them at this point is like try to, build a connection. Like, what do they mean to Frank? What do they reveal about him? But they are just, expendable. But most of the dialogue in this movie can be really painful at times. It's just so awkward. Like, it feels like, again, it was translated from another language, so like something was lost along the way. The characters here in the dialogue, it felt like when you talk to NPCs in a video game and they just give you exposition, like all the dialogue is like that. And in terms of acting, Elijah was actually very very dedicated in this role, almost a bit too much because like there's certain points where he does feel a bit silly. However, he does sell the awkwardness and the normalcy that serial killers have. When you look at him, he doesn't seem like a serial killer. When he talks, he just kind of feels like a really introverted person. But I don't know, he makes it work. The other actors, unfortunately, are very, very run of the mill. Like, you won't really remember them at all. And overall, Frank Calfoun, the director, had a very good vision, I think, for what he wanted, this technique to be. However, again, perhaps the source material was a bit too weak. Like, I feel like this technique could have worked better for another movie. And the project of this movie to, kind of disturb us kind of ran out of steam really quickly. A lot of people might think of this as like, oh, isn't this just like a found footage movie? And kind of, but it's different enough to not feel like that. So yeah, Maniac has a lot of good things that aren't really used to their potential. So like at the end, it's really just like an movie. You don't really need to see it. It's worth a look if you're a horror junkie because the premise really is very very unique. However, like if you're a fan of any other kind of movie, like it just might seem like kind of a waste of time because they don't use the technique that well. So yes, that is my review of Maniac. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? If you have seen it, if you haven't, or whatever, whether you liked it or you hated it, whatever you think, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.